All right, Jason again here from Metro Electronics, and we're going to continue on with part 2, which is the installation of a DSP-X. The installation is going to be done in this 2011 Ford Edge, and as you can see, it has a Sony system, which means it does have a fixed level audio output from the back of the radio to the factory amplifier located in the rear quarter panel. Now, as we were talking about in part 1, these types of systems, the communication, the data communication between the radio and the amplifier are what actually make the volume go up and down. So it's CAN bus information that tells the amplifier to increase or decrease volume. The radio outputs a fixed level. So for this installation, we're going to be using our AX DSP FD2 product. So it's going to come with, we went over this in part 1, but it's going to come with the DSP, your T harnesses, which for this particular installation will be both of these harnesses, and then our output harness. So obviously we're going to be getting rid of this factory amplifier, but we still want to retain the controls and features like fade and balance from the radio here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with disassembly. So we're going to start by disassembling side pieces. And really what's a great avenue, if you are unfamiliar of how to, or the steps that are required to disassemble this vehicle, is look up Metro's dash kit installation instructions. It'll give you a full disassembly on how to disassemble this dash to access the radio. That is, as long as we have a installation kit for it. So we got a couple Torx screws here. Go ahead and shut off the car. Pop this up. Snaps. 7 mils holding this panel in. Face. On the back of this particular unit is a plug for the HVAC controls. Just unplug this and we will set this out of the way. Now this is going to expose the radio chassis as well as the screen, and this is pretty much typical for many of your installations that you're going to be using a DSP for. So for this particular T harnesses for this vehicle, there's 2. There is a T harness for the radio chassis, and there's a T harness for the screen. Now, because this is a 8-inch screen, it has the standard Ford 54-pin harness in there. And the purpose of these harnesses, as we mentioned in part 1, is not only to get the fixed level audio signal into the DSP and then have the DSP decode it so it can control volume levels of aftermarket equipment, but we also want to make sure that we can retain sync communication, sync prompts, navigation prompts, Bluetooth prompts, and a lot of that is done with additional inputs, which is why we need the 54-pin harness. So I'm going to pop these out real quick, and then we'll show you how easy it is to plug in the T harness. So T-harness here, plug this. Get that out of the way. We're just going to set that to the side so I can show how easy it is to get everything plugged in. This is the radio chassis. These have a little bit more plugs on them. All right. So, as you can see, we got, in this particular vehicle, we've got pretty large opening here. And, you know, like I said, the T-harnesses, I've already made up some, you know, taped off the wires that we're not going to need for this installation. These two wires are an additional input to the DSP, which will connect to our 54 pin once we're ready to get this thing installed. And first thing is, with the anticipation that this DSP install is going to go quickly, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my RCAs run. My RCAs and my remote turn-on wire. And that way, when it's time, I can just drop them right into the back next to the amplifier, and then we can continue the installation. Now that we have the RCAs run, we're able to start making our connections inside the dash. We chose to do a 4-channel amp in the edge. So obviously I only need 2 pairs of RCAs, and then we have the remote wire. So now I can start plugging in my my harnessing. FD2 harness, plug right in, and any remaining plug, okay, that may not be provided, a T-harness may not have been provided with the kit, is not going to be needed, which means that this harness can plug directly back into the radio chassis, and we do not have any signals that need to be tapped into off of those wires. So plug the 54 pin in, lock that in. I can go ahead and release my 2 additional input wires. The installation on this is going to be pretty straightforward. White to white and white black to white black. We've even got some butt connectors here terminated. We can just get those crimped up. This is the DSP box, and we can plug our 20-pin input connector on it. We have our output harness right here. This output harness, because it's a DSPX, has 10 channels of output, and we're going to be provided a remote out, which we're going to be using to connect to our remote turn on for our aftermarket amplifiers. So any RCAs that you're not going to be using, it's always going to be good practice just to kind of tape those up. We're going to be using front and rear, but remember, within the DSP app, you can allocate those inputs and outputs to whichever you would like. You can group them together, you can program individually, whatever it is. So take these 3, put these up to our RCAs. And we'll just make note of these so that we know which ones are which. When we get to the back, I'm going to connect up my remote turn-on wire. So I brought in, we got a butt connector here. We're going to connect up our remote output from the DSP to our remote turn-on wire for our amplifiers. Now, with the DSP, it is limited on the output current capability of the remote turn-on lead from the DSP. So if you're going to use anything more than 2 amplifiers, we recommend wiring up an amplification relay, which can be done behind the dash. or at the amplifier itself. So, really, quite honestly, that's pretty much it for the installation of the DSP. So I can tuck this back into the dash, reinstall my screen, my chassis, and then obviously before I securely mount anything, I want to make sure that thing programs correctly and I have some output. So that's what we're going to do next. Now, one feature that I want to discuss and go over, just to clear up maybe any confusion, is the purpose of this 8-pin plug here. Now, our DSP T-harnesses, because this radio is controlled via CAN bus information, so CAN high, CAN low information, and that's how we control the volume and the fade and the balance with the DSP. And because of that type of communication, the installation of the DSP and the T-harness is done up front behind the radio. Now, as we were mentioning in part 1, if you have some of the higher end or different communication types of DSP product that you're planning to install into a vehicle, for example, Ford's A2B, which again is a Sony system or a B&O system, that installation is going to be done at the amplifier. GM Most 50 is done at the amplifier. So this particular installation, this Sony installation of the DSP FD2, is done in the dash. And we have an option, because it is this standard type of vehicle communication, we have the option of using this 8-pin plug. If we connect it up, we're taking the audio out of the radio chassis and feeding the signal back to the factory amplifier, which means that we can keep all of our factory speakers working and functioning off of the factory amplifier, but we can choose to add in an aftermarket subwoofer. And that's simply by, if this is unplugged, by plugging this in. That becomes an option for us. Then you can set up your subwoofer crossover, you can equalize it, all from the DSP app. Now, if you're going to do a full replacement of the factory amplified system, you're going to get rid of that factory amp, then you want to leave this unplugged. You're basically letting the DSP take the audio in, manipulate it how the installer or the customer sees fit, and then output it through the standard low-level outputs, RCA. So those will go directly into your aftermarket amplifiers. So really, the AXDSP we're as flexible as possible with the installation options that the installer has or the customer would like. So obviously for this particular installation, since we're going to be replacing the factory amplifier, we're going to leave this unplugged. So now I can get this all tied up and mounted into the back of this radio cavity. So with everything tied up, mounted, secured out of the way, we could start getting this OE panel reinstalled, the OE parts reinstalled. And all of our T-harness plugs are all OE style plugs, so they're going to plug right back into each other. And the installation should go relatively smooth. Okay, that's inside. Make sure we get it seated correctly. Okay, and just to test out, make sure that everything's going to turn back on correctly. So with it functioning, turning back on, we can basically just throw a couple screws in here and make sure that nothing's going to fall out of the dash. Then we can go ahead and set up the vehicle application within the DSP app. If you do have any questions about your installation, obviously we have instructions that are included with each DSP. We also have some nice graphics here that tell you what you're going to need to retain and plug in for the type of system you're going to be adding. So if you want to add a sub to a factory system, here's your wiring diagram. If you want to add a full range amp sub, replace the factory amplifier, and add in your own, obviously this is the wiring for that. So you can see that we are no longer using the factory amp. So then beyond that, the instructions go into how to set up the DSP app, which we're actually going to walk through real time with our tablet. So let me go grab it. Now, before we go further with finishing up or locking everything down, reassembling the dash, we really want to make sure that the DSP is functioning properly. Last thing you want to do is get this thing assembled and realize that you forgot to connect a wire, RCA came unplugged or something like that. So we're going to go through, plug in the climate control, plug in the radio chassis, and any component that was unplugged during the removal of the factory equipment. Oftentimes we get calls into tech support where somebody doesn't connect up an HVAC control wire, control harness, right? They leave this unplugged and they try to set up the DSP with that. Well, this is a part of the vehicle's CAN bus communication system. Now, whether or not these two systems are linked to the chassis, we don't know. You guys don't know. We do know, but and a typical installer wouldn't know that they're connected. So it's easier and safer to always make sure that everything is plugged back in, even if it is just laying there while you're doing your adjustments. So we can turn the ignition on, go into our AX DSP app. This is the AX DSP XL app. It's going to open up. We're going to scan for our device. There it is. Now we're going to go in and select our vehicle type. Select General, Ford, select our model. Ford Edge, 11 to 14. Now this is an important part, and it was mentioned in our first part, is the Ford Edge without an OE amplifier or with an OE amplifier. This particular Edge has an OE amplifier. We're going to hit apply, and the DSP is going to now flash itself to be compatible and communicate with 2011 to 2014 Ford Edge. We can confirm that by going into the About screen and seeing that our vehicle info is Ford Edge 2011 to 14, has an OE amp. Yes, it does. And then this is additional information about the AX DSP XL app, DSP info, and also the model of the device that you're using, smartphone or tablet or whatever it is. So we know that it is functioning and that it is programmed. And if there is any questions about the DSP's output, we can hit identify. The only thing that we have to make sure of first is, we want to make sure that our amplifiers are connected, our aftermarket amplifiers. So from this point, now that we know that this is functioning, we can move to the back and we can discuss the amp bypass harnesses, obviously removing the factory amplifier, and showing you how to get that part of it installed. So one thing I want to make sure that we do is before shutting off the ignition, we want to make sure that we lock this down. And what this lockdown is going to do is going to save the vehicle information onto the DSP. It's also going to be, you're going to have to lock down every single time you go in or I go in and I make a change to this, whether it's a crossover adjustment or an equalizer adjustment. Anytime you make a change, you should always lock down. And that's just going to save the information to the DSP. So we'll go to the back. Let's see what's back there.